Good afternoon. How's everybody doing? You guys ready to get started? I have to tell you that this is my third time presenting at South by Southwest. And last year we spoke on this topic, and there was a publisher in the room, and she came up afterwards and she said, "You need to write a book about that. We want to do that." And so literally 1 week ago, because of what happened here a year ago, this came out. What a pain in the ass. Seriously, if I would have known how much work that was when she told me to do that, I would have been like, yeah, no, not happening. But anyway, I'm Kay Sargent. I am the Global Director of Thought Leadership at HOK. And if you guys are okay, I'm going to be down here, not on the stage, because I move around a lot and I'm a klutz and I'd probably fall off the stage anyway. So I think it's safer if I'm here if you guys are good with that. I am a practicing designer of 40 years. Thank you. Nobody's going to say I don't look that old? No, nobody? All right, thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Love it. And I have 5 children, so I look every day of that, right, because of those kids. But we had a really interesting scenario several years ago as a designer, and I think if I had a superpower, my superpower would be curiosity. That has always sustained me, and I wake up every day thinking, God, what am I going to figure out today? And I just never have enough time to do all of the stuff that I truly want to do. But I was in a meeting with a client about 9 years ago, and at the end of the meeting, as we were getting ready to get up and go out, he said, "Oh yeah, by the way, how do you design space for someone that's ADHD?" Anybody think they could answer that question? Well, I had an okay answer, but not a great answer. And so I wanted to find out more. And so we dug into this topic, and literally for the last 8 years, we've done a ton of research on this. We've done multiple different studies, and we've combined it with a lot of our workplace thought leadership. And so what you're going to see today is the culmination of all of that research, and we're still doing it. We're still in the middle of all of this stuff. So I'm going to tell you why that matters, why that's an important question, why it's good for business, and how we should be creating spaces that really, truly address how we go forward on this. Now, let's start with just some basics. Neurodiversity is a difference, not a deficit. That's a really important clarification to make. When we started this 8 years ago, almost nobody knew what we were talking about when we said neurodiversity. True. And now almost every single RFP we get from a client talks about it in that RFP. When we started this 8 years ago, it was considered that 1 in 8 people were considered to be neurodivergent. Now it's 1 in 5. I'm going to tell you, based on our research, I think that's wrong. I actually think that it's much more like 1 in 3, and that pretty soon, hopefully in my lifetime, because these kids are killing me pretty quickly, so it's got to happen soon. But I really honestly believe that we're going to get to a point that we stop calling it neurodivergent because it's just neuronormal. It just is who we are. We all think and process things differently. But we're going to go with the 1 in 5 statistic today because that's common in the academic world and the scientific world. And this includes things like people that are on the autistic spectrum, ADHD, dyslexia, a whole variety of neurotypes. Okay? And what we also know is that 70% of disabilities are invisible. So it's not outwardly apparent. And you could probably do some quick math in this room and figure out about how many people in this room probably might be neurodivergent. And then of those, literally about 70%, you would never actually really even know. So if we go with that 1 in 5 number, right, the fascinating thing about that is that 50% of the people that are neurodivergent don't even know that they are. Because in my generation, you weren't diagnosed. In fact, a lot of the neurotypes that we talk about today honestly didn't even have a definition 20 years ago. And in my generation, you were just that hyper kid that couldn't sit still in the classroom. But what's happening right now is we have a whole generation of kids that are aware, that have their own IEP, that are coming into the workplace and have expectations. And by the way, when they go and get diagnosed, Doctors are looking at mom and dad and saying, looking at you too, mom and dad, because 80 to 90% of this is hereditary. So now there's this massive wave of midlife diagnoses as well, where people for the first time are understanding truly kind of how their brains function and why they might function a little bit differently. And if you happen to be neurodivergent, you are in damn good company, because these are people that are really artistic. They think outside of the box. They challenge the status quo. They don't just roll over. God, I really want a bunch of neurodivergent people in our government right now. Really want. But they think differently and they see things differently. And they tend to be much more entrepreneurial because they don't necessarily always fit into the norm. So they kind of seek opportunities for them to go outside of that and to really thrive. And I want you to think about this. I'm a designer, okay? And by the way, I should just make it very, very clear. I am not an academic. I am not a scientist. I am not a medical doctor. I am an interior designer that works at one of the world's largest architectural firms, okay? But I truly, honestly believe that the spaces that we are designing have a huge impact on people. And if you don't understand that, then it becomes a problem. So we really think it's important that we understand that. And if you think about the world, 18% of the population has a physical disability. Okay, apparent physical disability. Really about 2 to 3% of the world is in a wheelchair. But we have changed every single building, every sidewalk, every street across the country and across the world to accommodate people with a physical disability. But a higher percentage of people conservatively are neurodivergent. What have we done to accommodate all the people that are neurodivergent in the workplace? Almost nothing. Okay? And I just want to pause for a minute and just also say this. This is not just about people that are neurodivergent. I don't know a single person on the planet that isn't negatively impacted or impacted by sound, light, temperature. We are all impacted by stimulation. So this isn't just about that. But if you're neurodivergent, it could be debilitating. Whereas if you're neurotypical, it could be just agitating or aggravating. But it is absolutely impacting every single one of us. So we really, truly need to think about that. And so we're starting to shift our definition to be more about the social model or the social definition, which it means that you might have an impairment. It's just how you were born. We can't really change that. If the physical environment supports you, then you're not at a disadvantage. But if the physical environment doesn't support you, then you are. And I can't do anything about your impairment, but I can do something about the physical environment. And so, given what we can and cannot control, what is causing the disadvantage? Space, right? And so it's attitudes, it's the barriers in the space, it's our feelings, et cetera, that are really actually causing those problems. And this is one of my favorite quotes from an autistic student who said, "We are freshwater fish in salt water. If you put us in fresh water, we will function just fine. But if you put us in salt water, we will struggle to survive." I don't know about anybody else, but I did not go into design to stick it to people. I went into design because I really, truly believe that the spaces that I design can have a positive impact. But then I also have to acknowledge that if I'm not designing those spaces well, it can have a negative impact. And in my world, that's just not acceptable. And so our company basically is putting all of the research that we've done out there into the world because we believe that this is not a competitive advantage. This is a moral imperative. We have a responsibility to create spaces where everybody can function and thrive. And what's happening right now is we are all sensory gating. Every single one of you, literally every second, is getting bombarded by sensory stimulation. 11 million bits of sensory stimulation are coming at you every single day. And we can't process that. We can only process about 50. So every single one of this is gating, trying to ignore it, etc. I did an experiment recently. We had a round table in our Boston office. And we get there in the morning, and nobody had been there, it was over the weekend, and that space was so hot because the air conditioning hadn't been on all weekend. And we were about to have a bunch of people come into our office. So we open up all the windows and try to get it nice and cool, right? And everybody comes in and everybody sits down, and everybody at that table was a real estate executive. So they understand space, et cetera, right? Okay. They all sit down at the table. The construction site next door kicks into gear. The jackhammer starts going, and all of a sudden it's right? And I started to go and close the window, and I'm like, no, I'm just going to see what happens here. What do you think happened? It took 20 minutes, and nobody said a word. Finally, I couldn't. There were two people that were so physically distraught by the jackhammer, they couldn't focus, they couldn't function. Nobody could hear anything. And I'm like, how long are we going to allow this to happen before somebody says, hey, could we close the window? Nobody ever said that. How many people are sitting in your offices right now dealing with something that is annoying the crap out of them, but they just suck it up and don't do anything about it? And by the way, do you think that impacts their well-being, their happiness, their ability to focus, and their productivity? So if every company on the planet is trying to solve for that problem right now, maybe we should start paying attention to the sensory elements in the space that are really causing a lot of these issues, because this is absolutely what's happening. The other thing that we know, this is another one of my favorite quotes, is that people that are neurodivergent tend to be the canary in the coal mine. They're going to feel it first. It doesn't mean that it's not coming for you, but they're going to feel it first, right? And so it's really important that when somebody says, hey, that's really bothering me, to stop and to think about how many other people is that actually negatively impacting as well, and they're just sucking it up. Now, in kindergarten, everything you ever needed to know, you learned in kindergarten, right? Wrong. First of all, Pluto isn't even a planet anymore, so they've been lying to us for years. But they talk about 5 senses, right? That's what we all learned? No. There's actually 8. So introspective is like your internal sensations. It can be temperature, et cetera. Proprioceptive is your just position in space, like your body position. And then vestibular is your balance and coordination. I had a really physical example of how this impacts somebody, right? I walked into an interview with some of my colleagues, and the space was a beautifully designed lobby. And they had slats in the ceiling, slats on the wall, angles on the floor. And one of my colleagues walked in and instantly was like, whoa. He had to sit down and stare at the ground because he got vertigo, because there were so many things going in so many different directions that he got literally disoriented in that space and literally got physically nauseous. He could not function in that space. And we could go on and on and on about the number of cases where we have seen that the physical environment is impacting people. And so we really need to think about how are we handling all of this. So we're going to talk a little bit about sensory thresholds, okay? So in the middle, you have people that are neurotypical, right? Or they're sensory neutral. It doesn't mean that you don't feel it, but you might sense it a little bit. I might be a little sensitive to sound. I might need a little more visual stimulation, but I fall into a predictable range, okay? But then on the left side, you have people that are hypersensitive. And people that are hypersensitive are sensory avoiders. They can't handle too much stimulation. Music bothers them. They might need, to have a little bit more physical space between themselves, bright lights, flickering sounds, any of that kind of stuff can really be disturbing to them. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have people that are hyposensitive or sensory seekers. These are people that actually need more. These are the people that go sit in a coffee shop because they want that buzz and being that energy of being around other people, right? Or they're people that have to listen to music. Or anybody have kids in here? Like kids, literally their brains are multimodal now because they're sitting there watching a movie on their phone and doing like something else, like 2 or 3 things at once. It's crazy to me how they do that, but they are. And so these are people that actually might need more. And so our challenge is that we have to create spaces that accommodate for all of these individuals wherever they might fall. And where you are in the morning could also vary depending on where you are in the afternoon. And so what we know is sensory distractions, sound, temperature, light, all those things, cause cognitive discomfort. I'm irritated, I'm annoyed, I can't handle this. You lose your concentration, you lose your focus, and that leads to loss of engagement and productivity, poor well-being, poor recall, all of those things. I'll bet $100 of somebody else's money, that there's not a single person in this room whose companies aren't trying to figure out right now how to make their people more productive, happier, more engaged, and better well-being. But what is the root cause of all of that? Sensory stimulation. And what are we actually really doing? I have to tell you, as a workplace designer, Lauren knows this, we deal with this all the time, right? Everybody comes to me, it's like, oh, what's that great amenity that we can put in the space so that everybody will want to come back to the office? Okay, a donut ain't gonna do it for me. I'm just gonna tell you that right now, okay? And we're not really thinking about what are the real issues that people are having and addressing those. We just are kind of ignoring those things that really, quite frankly, are the biggest issues. But when we don't ignore it, it's good for business. Because what we know is that when we are more diverse, regardless of what people are talking about today, when we can be more diverse, when we can bring in different perspectives, when we get out of groupthink and silos, we can actually improve productivity, increase revenues, and double incomes. In fact, there are multiple companies right now that are specifically targeting specific neurotypes because of their ability to find patterns in codes, or sort through things in a different way, or see things that maybe other people aren't necessarily seeing, or comprehend things or think about things in a different way. And what we also know is that 85% of people that are autistic today want to work, but they are underemployed. And 69% actively are seeking and really do want to be in the world, in the workforce, but they can't get jobs. I want you to think about something for just a minute. Every single one of you right now, I'm willing to bet, is dealing with an employee or a colleague that you find challenging. They blurt out things in the middle of a meeting. They can't sit still. They never look like they're focused. And they get like they're all over the place, right? They don't finish assignments, right? And we get irritated with them. But in many cases, people that are neurodivergent just process things or function differently. For people that are ADHD, time is binary. And I'm telling you, my youngest son, I'm the mother of 5, my youngest son, it's a miracle that we're both still alive right now. Because if he had a massive project that was due on Friday, he'd start Thursday night at 11 o'clock. It's like, dude, you can't even, like, this is a 48-hour assignment. Like, what? But for him, time, binary, it's either now or not now. And it's not now until Thursday. Or they can't handle complex assignments, so they need to break things down. Or they can't process things if they're sitting stagnantly for long periods of time and their minds are just like, oh, like I need to physically engage, right? And so we need to understand that maybe we're just not setting people up for success. Several years ago, I was speaking at a conference, and this woman walked up to me, and she said, I've been meaning to tell you this story forever. Because before that, she said, I heard you speak on this topic. And right before I walked into the room, I was on the phone with my colleagues, and we were talking about one of our colleagues who was really challenging, and that we were going to have to let him go because he just wasn't fitting in. Really talented, but just not fitting in. And she came in, heard the presentation, called him and said, don't fire him yet, like, hold on. She went back, and they had a conversation with him about, what can we do to help you be more successful? And he goes, man, I find it really hard sitting in meetings for long periods of time. And maybe if I could get a recording of the meeting so I can listen to it later and process it in my own time. And maybe if we break down the assignments, and so he told them what would help him. I saw her then a few years later. He is their chief innovation officer at their company to this day. He did not get fired. And so how many people right now are you dealing with that we expect them to conform to our way of doing things, but maybe we need to change the perception of what that is. Maybe the problem isn't them, it's us. And we need to think about how we can make them fit in. Okay, so I'm going to share some of the science of design. If you check on that QR code, you'll get the entire report, but we have done 6 studies, workshops, multiple case studies with clients to date. They're all in the book too. And this was a study that we did in the scientific workplace. If you think about what is some of the most rigid workspace ever, right? Scientific labs. Okay, so we wanted to go to one of the most restrictive spaces that you could go to. We did. And we got 241 people to respond to this survey. The results, literally we had to double check the results like 5 times because we're like, this just cannot be true. We had environmental psychologists. We had 3 or 4 partners. They all were double checking the numbers. If you look at this, only 30% of the people that responded thought that they were neurotypical. That's the exact opposite of what the expected norm is today. And 25% were autistic. That's staggering, because you know what the average is? It's anticipated or speculated that 2.2% of the population is autistic. 25%. So we started to break this down a little bit, and here's where it really starts making sense. We broke it down by age, we broke it down by gender, but let's just break it down by age. We broke down the 60-year-olds. Anybody 60 and older? 70% said that they were neurotypical. That's closer to the average, but it's still more, right? Still higher percentage. And 30% said, I might be ADHD. Because again, remember, when I was a kid, that was it. You're either this or ADHD. Look at the 20-year-olds. Only 17% of 20-year-olds were neurotypical. And this is diagnosed. Because if they weren't sure, they said that. I'm not sure, but they anticipated or expected they were. What is going on? Well, what's going on is there's a heightened awareness. Now, I'm also going to speculate this. And there's a few studies that are starting to point to this. That certain people with certain talents probably tend to go into certain professions. If you're really good with details and research, you're going to go into math and sciences and tech and coding. Okay, if you're not, architects and designers, like we're not good with the words, but we're really good with shapes and pictures, right? So I'm willing to bet there's a whole lot of architects and designers that are dyslexic. Read our emails, it will probably confirm that, right? Especially any from me. And so that's part of it. But if you look at that, there is a wave that is coming. And the question is not if. The question is when you get a knock on your door and somebody says, hey, I'm ADHD, I need special accommodations. Would anybody even know what to do? Or what does that mean? We don't know. And we got to figure that out fast, because it's not acceptable that we have a whole bunch of people that are coming into our spaces and we're really doing almost nothing to address their needs. Now, we also broke it down by neurotype. Okay, this is interesting, right? So you can see that people that are autistic might have responded to stimulation in the built environment different than people that were ADHD. Okay, and autistic people, you know, there's a great saying, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Okay, they don't all respond the exact same way together, but kind of if we look at general patterns. But why is this important? Okay, well, if you're Microsoft and you're targeting a program specifically for autistic individuals for their coding abilities, you might want to know that they have the highest sensitivity to sensory stimulation in the built environment than anybody does, and take that into account. That should inform how you're creating spaces to make them feel more welcome. And here's the other thing that I think is absolutely fascinating. I could go on about this for hours. Gender. So if you look at the far right side, just look at the right side for now. So men is the top line, women, the brown, non-binary is the gray. They all are kind of in the same range, right? Like 59 to 73, kind of close. But go to the left side here. Men tend not to have acute responses. They might get a little agitated, but they tend in general to be less sensitive to sensory stimulation. And there's lots of speculations about this. Like, you know, are their hands bigger? You know, what are there physical things that affect that? And I will tell you, we have found this to be true in many of our studies and outside of those as well. Women are 5 times as likely to have an acute or a high sensitivity to something, and non-binary individuals even higher. And so when we did this again, this was another thing that we went back and we double-checked, like triple-checked, because it was such a staggering difference. And after we did this, 2 other studies came out that noted the same thing, right? So there absolutely are differences in the genders about how we respond to sensory stimulation in that built environment. Okay, I'm also going to show you just in general the challenges. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a decoder here. So you're going to see an element, and then the top line was the first survey that we did, and every single person that took that first survey was neurodivergent, 100% diagnosed neurodivergent. But the reality is, find me a workplace where 100% of the people are neurodivergent. Doesn't exist, really. It's not really reality. It's nice to know. So the next one we did was in our San Francisco office, no preconceived notion of who was and wasn't. And the numbers, it came in about 35 to 40% were neurodivergent. Okay? And the next one was that scientific workplace that we just did. So what are the 3 biggest things that are impacting people? Sound, lighting, and temperature. Anybody surprised by that? No. The next things, and by the way, our hypothesis was that those things were negatively impacting people that were neurodivergent at a higher percentage, but it didn't mean that it wasn't impacting the others, and that came out to be true. The same things that are bothering people that are neurodivergent bother neurotypical people just to a lesser degree. Okay? All right, so the next thing that we did is we looked at proximity and density. Now, somebody asked me, do you think this was impacted by COVID? And the answer is yes, but I don't know for sure. Because we could find no other study that ever asked that question. But I think we have all been impacted by COVID about how closely we are to people, right? I don't think we'll ever sit on an airplane again and have somebody sneeze and not be disgusted by that and be like, ugh, right? Like that'll take us years to get rid of that. Okay, so that was interesting. And part of it, I think, is we got desensitized. When we were working remotely, you just got desensitized from being around people. You just weren't, right? Okay, the next thing is enclosure. So I'm gonna be really honest. I told you I'm not a I'm a designer. There are a lot of individuals out there that are in the environmental psychology and HR world that are consulting about neurodiversity and neuroinclusion. Love it, fabulous. We don't do that, glad they are. But they don't necessarily always understand space. And so often their recommendations are Band-Aids. Put on headphones. You're not solving the problem, you're just putting a Band-Aid on it. Go home. You're not solving the problem, you're just avoiding it. Go in a private office, okay? Because everybody thinks that open offices are too loud. And I will tell you as a designer, there are a lot of very poorly designed open plans. There really are. But when we do them well, they can actually be very successful. And more people are bothered by being in confined space, all these little phone booths that are popping up. People feel like if you need to physically move and fidget, like and you're in this little box, right? Or if you feel like you're a fish and everybody's staring at you, or if as designers we're trying to make them fun and exciting, so we paint them bright red and put a crazy pattern, I literally have just shut you in a room with a thing that you can't handle, right? And so going into open spaces is not, or enclosed spaces is not necessarily the answer. I am old enough to remember the 80s when it was rows and rows of private offices. That was horrible, and we don't want to go back to that. So we need to find the happy medium, and I want to show you where that is. This rocked a whole lot of people's world because everybody was just telling people, go be in private spaces. They never asked if that bothered anybody. And so the cure was actually worse than the symptom, right? But they never asked. So that was a big thing. And then pattern, color, and texture. Now, if you notice, look at the percentages. Percentages are way low. I don't believe that that's because those things don't matter. I believe it's because most of the world that we occupy is this, and this is actually a pretty nice conference room center. They're gray or tan boxes. You don't have a lot of color or pattern or texture. So because it's not as prevalent, it's not as offensive. So you don't think about it as much. But I'm going to tell you right now, if all 4 of these walls were bright red, and there was a wild, crazy texture on that wall and a wild pattern on that wall, not a single one of you would be looking at me right now. Not one of you. It would absolutely impact you. And so I think we downplay this because it isn't as prevalent but it doesn't mean that it actually really isn't as important. So that's some of the things that we've done. The other thing that we did is we came up with a whole list of considerations. We actually have about 140, and in the book we talk about those. But we gave people 40, still a lot in a survey. And all 40 of those are vetted, good strategies. None of them were bad. What are the ones that you think are most important? These 13 in all 6 studies came up in the top. Maybe not in the same order, but these 13 continually came up. So having the options to move, the ability to, having the option of where you want to work, the ability to move, either away from something or just like physically move and fidget, right? Like stand or move, et cetera. A lot of people in meetings need to do that, right? Anybody ever seen Stevie Wonder? Stevie Wonder rocks. We all have nervous energy that we need to get out of our body. But we suppress that because nobody else is doing it. So you got the people that are doing this with their foot or their pen or the clicking or whatever. Like it's in us. He doesn't know that nobody else is rocking. So it's a very natural thing. And by the way, I love it. Anytime you hear a baby cry, every mother in the room starts doing this, right? Like, so funny. Okay, the next thing, third one down, have a dedicated space. And that might contradict the first one. Okay, but there's no one solution that's going to solve everything. We need to give people options and choice. If you're OCD and you need consistency in your life, and as things get chaotic, having a dedicated space that you don't have to think about could be really, really important to you. And that you can have some control over can be really important. And for some people that need to move and fidget, that could be the kiss of death because they don't want to stay in one space all day. Natural daylight, sitting in low traffic areas, quiet spaces, areas to retreat to. In a lot of spaces, there's just nowhere that you can just step to the side and just take a breath. Like you just got off a really bad phone call, or you just like finished something, or you just need a minute, right? We don't have that in many spaces. Lighting, natural elements, ergonomics, visual clutter. Here's another gender thing. Women tend to have a higher sensitivity to, they actually want more visual stimulation. They like that, in general, tend to like that. But it's got to be in order, and it has to be like, in sync. Can't be a mess. So gentlemen, just note to self. All those pillows on your bed, that's our visual interest. Get them out of order, we're coming at you like flying monkeys because they got to be in order, right? Like seriously. And that's actually incredibly common for women to actually need that. Screens to block out noise, sound, and then just visual connections. This is about physical safety. If I'm walking down a hallway and it's so like squirrely that I can't tell who's coming, I don't feel physically safe, right? If you've ever been in a WeWork, they were designed intentionally with crazy corridors so that you would have to bump into people because they like that. Whoever designed those, Adam, was hyposensitive, I guarantee it. Okay, somebody that's hypersensitive and needs that sense of what's coming at me, really, that's important. And it's basically called prospect and refuge. And the simplest way I can describe this is every single one of you did this after COVID the first time you went to a grocery store. You're walking down that aisle, you're looking down there like, oh God, there's 4 or 5 kids and none of them are wearing masks. Yep, I'll go to that aisle later. And you just kept going, right? You are prospecting to see, is it safe and can I get out? And if you can't, you're done. This is why a lot of people, especially anybody that's been through trauma, has a very difficult time in open spaces with their back exposed. Because I can't tell what's coming up behind me and I don't feel safe. And if you don't feel safe, you can't function at a higher level. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So these are the things. Low-hanging fruit, if you wanted to go back and do something right now, those are the 13 things that I would say, go do that right now. And so let's take that lab. This is what a typical lab space looks like. Rows and rows of benches, densely packed, not a lot of room to move or fidget, no space to step to the side. And this is where all of our research on workplace starts to collide, right? So we know that there are 6 things that people are doing: socializing, congregating, they're creating, they're that communal working, like alone together in a big open space maybe, contemplating and concentration. Those are the 6 things that you're doing. And in this space, there's very little opportunity, if any, to contemplate, to co-create, or even to socialize. But let's take that same plan, get the same number of people, but now let's mix it up a little bit. Let's give people options and choices. Let's make it so that there are some areas that are a little bit more communal and some for people that need a little bit more shielding. So now all of a sudden, it's not just rows and rows of workstations. Come over here. You can see now there's spaces where people want to work together, they can, but you've also got spaces over here. You're all still in this, it's like a zone within a zone, right? And there's different opportunities so that you can choose what fits you right. Because here's the other thing that we've learned that makes this really challenging. Most of us have very poor sensory intelligence. If I were to ask you right now, what are you sensitive to? Most people couldn't define that. If I were to ask you, did you have a preference of where you sit in a restaurant? Most people would be like, no. But the second that maitre d' starts walking you to a table, every single one of us instinctively is like, no, I don't want to sit there, I want to sit over here. And you can't even explain why. You just instinctively know, this feels better to me, I want to sit there. Okay? So if you assign everybody a desk, what are your chances of getting everybody's sensory needs met by you randomly assigning a desk? 0? Right. But if I have the opportunity to kind of navigate and check it out, I will naturally find the same spot, or I will find a spot that I feel comfortable with. And if you choose, you're a creature of habit, you want to sit in that same spot every day, you can do that. But you might be a mover and a shaker, and you got to sit someplace just different every single day, right? So it's important that we enable people to have that choice and control when we go forward. Because when we design for the extreme, we benefit the mean. Meaning, curb cuts were done for people in wheelchairs, but they benefit people with suitcases, strollers, and a whole bunch of other people with ambulatory issues as well. Everybody benefits. And so for us, it's really important that we kind of take this 3-legged stool approach, okay? We got to think about the operational side. We have to ask and train and understand so that they're prepared to come in and so that their colleagues are prepared. But then we need to address the environment. Because if we're bringing people into the organization and they're all trained up, but then we're putting it in an environment that's salt water and they need fresh water, they're not going to be successful. And then, even then, we're only going to get it 80% right. We need to allow for some kind of adjustments, whether it's recording a meeting, adjustable height desk, whatever that might be, so that you can tailor it to your specific needs. And this is where, as designers, we need to lean into the science of design. I will argue over a beer later with anybody that wants this fight that every decision that we make, color, light, temperature, pattern, everything, mass, everything is influencing how you feel and function in that space. It's not just what's trending or what I think is cool. And designers need to lean into that even more, and they need to leverage all of this information that we have so that they can really, truly do a better job going forward. So the steps for inclusion. You got to consult early on with professionals. You got to educate your team. You need to understand where you are. If I were to look at you right now and say, is your space neuroinclusive? Almost nobody can answer that question because they don't know what it means. It's kind of like when ADA came out and they said, is your space handicap accessible? Like, I don't know. Tell me what it should be, and then I'll tell you if it is. So we have come up with a list of recommendations that really start to address this. So we look at the modalities of work. Those are those 6 modalities. We need to have a hyper and then a hypo sensitivity. So again, those concentrative focus areas. If you're hypersensitive, you might want a box that you can close the door and you can control the level of stimulation. But if you're hyposensitive, man, you're going to hate being in that space. You just want a space off to the side that you can move and fidget, and you're physically telling people by where you're sitting that you need some control. The other thing that's really important is spatial sequencing. Okay? What's happening right now in workspaces is the equivalent of me taking your dining room table and putting it in your bedroom. We're just pureeing the workspace. We're dumping stuff all together. We're not creating clear zones for each activity. We're putting collaboration spaces right next to where people are trying to focus or concentrate, and then putting a little phone booth right there, right? All the right pieces, all in the wrong spaces. And so none of them are actually effective, right? And so we need to be able to think about this better. And so when we can start to create spaces that have all 6 modalities of work, hyper and hypo, spatially sequenced, you can laugh out loud in the social area and you're not bothering anybody. You can sit in the quiet space and you're not going to hear that. You can sit in the common space and have a conversation without people looking at you funny, or looking at people that are trying to meet right next to you and telling them to be quiet because they're bothering you. This is the secret sauce about why most open plans fail, because they got the right components, but they're just shoving it all in there. And this is really, really critical. So the 3 big principles here are options and variety, choice, and control. So options without variety is like saying you can go to any restaurant you want to. They all got the same menu, though. Well, what choice is that, right? Options without choice is like saying, we got private offices. But you're too low ranking. You don't get to sit in there. And then options without control is giving somebody a desk that's designed for somebody that's 5'2", and you're 6'5". We have got to stop designing workspaces to the average, because no one is average today, and one size is misfitting all. We actually believe that what we should be looking at is environmental-based working. Has anybody in this room heard of activity-based working? It's where you don't necessarily have an assigned desk, but depending on what you're doing that day, there are different areas, and you go to the area that's assigned. It's the equivalent of a one-room efficiency apartment versus a single-family home. In a single-family home, you've got different rooms that are assigned for different things. Okay, so your office has different areas that are assigned for different tasks. But it's the environment that's negatively impacting us. And so here's what I'm going to say. After 40 years of being a designer, I cannot design a space that is perfectly fit for every single person from a temperature standpoint. But the sun moves, so should you. I guarantee in every single building at any time there is a hot spot and a cool spot. And if we expect the building to constantly adjust to your personal needs, it's not going to happen. So maybe what we need to do is get up and move to different areas in that building. There are naturally quieter spaces. There are naturally louder spaces. So it's about creating different areas within the building, some designed for focus and quiet, lighter temperature, or it could be a little bit warmer. The lighting could be a little bit lower. The colors are a little bit different than what you might have in a social space. It's about being smart about how we design the space. And I really want to just share with you Althea real quickly. So Althea is our client from Fidelity. And they wanted to go and update their guidelines and standards. And so what they asked us to do is to go in and to look at all of the different things that they had and to come up with recommendations, design considerations. And so we created design considerations about planning, circulation, furniture, signage, and all the elements, light, color, texture, pattern. There is a QR code in the book that takes you to this list, because we didn't want to print the list, because the second you put something in print, it's dated. And I learn something new every day. And so I wanted to be able to fix it if somebody said to me, hey, you shouldn't have done that, you should have done this. Oh my God, you're right, I should have. Anybody that goes to that thing, now they got the latest and greatest. It's a living list, and that's really important. So that QR code, by the way, up there, takes you to that living list that we have. And here's just a real quick example of some of the furniture considerations. We didn't want to give you hundreds. I could have, but if I gave you hundreds, you wouldn't do it, right? So we tried to keep it higher level and things that made sense. And because we're designers, we got to put everything in a graphic form, right? So here's focus and concentrative space. And you can see if you're hypersensitive versus hyposensitive. Hyposensitive people might want to be out in the open. They might want to have like that sound, like you're somebody who's sitting in a Starbucks. They might need that stimulation and that energy, but they're off to the side signaling people that they don't want to be bothered. If every desk is exactly the same, you cannot signal to anybody your level of engagement. If I have a variety of things, if I'm sitting off to the side, I'm telling somebody I don't want to be bothered versus sitting at the high top table in the middle. We figured this out in bars. We can figure it out in the workplace too. Okay, this is that communal space. And in some cases like this, it's a zone within a zone, right? You don't want to create, exclusive spaces, but you have areas within this where somebody can concentrate, and then you have those communal spaces off to the side. Color is really, really powerful. And I can go on for hours about this. I'll just say this. If you were in that garage and you parked on the second floor, more people would remember that they parked on the pink level than the second floor. Color is amazingly powerful. And biophilia. And this is not just putting a plant in the corner. This is about biomorphic shapes. Nowhere in nature is there a rectangular white box with strip lighting. Nowhere. We need to create spaces, shapes, forms, materials, different lighting areas that simulate the outside elements in the nature that we see. You can also see down here a little bit of prospect and refuge as well. And then we took that list of all those considerations and we put it into a checklist for this client, for Althea and Fidelity. Because now she can go to all of her facilities and say, okay, this is what we're trying to get to. Where are we now? Do these facilities actually do this? And if they don't, then what is a reasonable way for us to accommodate that? And then we can also decide, is it high impact? Is it high cost? Or is it highly disruptive? And they can prioritize. If something is really impactful, low cost and low disruptive, do it now. If something is low impact, highly costly and highly disruptive, maybe you wait and do that when you move, right? And so it allowed them to go through and say, you know what, we're actually in pretty good shape versus, wow, we are way off the bat, and to start making an action plan for how they should go forward. Okay, the other thing that people say is accommodations are too expensive. They don't want to make them. 56% of accommodations cost nothing. 37% cost an average of $300 or less. But I'm going to tell you, I think that's the wrong question. The right question basically you should be thinking about is, what is it costing you not to do it? When I had those clients in that conference room and I didn't close the window with a jackhammer outside for 20 minutes, that was 20 minutes of a total waste. Nobody heard anything. And by the way, after that, there were some people that were so agitated they couldn't even focus after that, right? What is it costing you not to address these issues? And how many people are being negatively impacted because we're not dealing with this? Okay, just real quickly, just to show, this is our Seattle office. We tested everybody. We did a sensory and an engagement survey before they moved. They went home and worked for a month, and then they moved into the new space, and 3 months later, we tested again. Here are the results from that space. The farther to the right, the more important something is. The higher up, the more satisfied they are. So you could see there were a lot of things in the existing space that they thought were important, but they were underperforming. This is in the new space. This is stuff that if you show your boss, they'll be like, yeah, do it, right? Everything significantly improved. And there was a 38% increase in the satisfaction in acoustics, 25% increase in the ability to manage distractions, 32% increase in satisfaction to quiet spaces. We had a 20% increase in satisfaction for thermal comfort, 24% increase in the ability to ideate and create. To an architectural firm, that's money. That's golden. That's what we want, right? And a 16% perceived increase in productivity. That's pretty significant. And then we did the biometrics, okay? People were far more active when they were in the office than when they were working at home. In fact, you're supposed to take 10,000 steps a day. The average American before COVID took about 3,500. During COVID, it dropped to about 1,000. That is bad for our physical and mental health, right? Our heartbeat was higher when we were in the office, but the resting heartbeat was actually the lowest, partly because you're not just in the state of limbo all day, sitting in one place at home on your computer all day, right? You actually get those natural fluctuations. And you slept more when you worked from home, but you also laid in bed restless a lot longer when you were working from home, which isn't healthy or good for you. So we got lots of different metrics that show just, those increases that we started to see, and, a 13% increase in the satisfaction of well-being when people were in those shared spaces together. And it doesn't have to look shockingly different, okay? This is a Seattle office, and you can start to see it's just clear definitions of planes, having those moments that are memorable so that people can navigate the space naturally and they remember where they are. It's not just this one big white box that you get lost. Having higher ceilings in some areas, bringing in natural elements into the space, having room for people to move and fidget. In this space, in all honesty, 90% of conference rooms are the largest rectangular table we can shove into a room with the maximum number of chairs you couldn't stand. You can't even get out if you wanted to. God help you if you wanted to stand or move or fidget. Okay. In this space, you can choose how close you are to somebody. You can choose if you're writing or sitting more comfortably. You can choose to move around a little bit. That allows you to be far more satisfied with your choice, and then you can actually focus and be more engaged. If you want to stand up and move and fidget, if you want to write in the wall, knock yourself out, you can do it. Lots of access to natural daylight, and even the colors introduce biophilia. It doesn't just have to be that plant in the corner. We believe that there is a compelling human and a business case for inclusion, and that we all need to step up and start creating spaces. And if you go to HOK.com, you can get all of the research that we've done to date, or you can text me or I'll send it to you. And then this is the book that has come out. I think it ships March 18th. But it has everything in here and all the other studies that we did, the findings from that. And it talks about our entire philosophy about how to design much more extensively than I shared with you. And tomorrow, I'm actually doing a book signing. So if you're interested, in fact, South by Southwest is the first place on the planet that actually has the book. Besides, Singapore beat us. Singapore had it last week. But this is the very first place. I only have one. So I'm going to go steal some tomorrow. And I'm always happy if anybody wants to get in touch with us. We have to spread the word. We have to get this out there. Again, this is not a competitive advantage. This is a moral imperative. Designers, real estate individuals, anybody in HR, any human, and I think there's a few in this room, need to think about how are we creating spaces so that we as people can thrive. So with that, if anybody has a question, please hop up to the mic. And we'll do it. Yes.
Well, first off, thank you. This was amazing. My name's Isabel. I manage our Neurodiversity at Work program at Hearst. And so all of this is super validating for the work we do. But often when I talk with our design team of our physical spaces, we don't redo our whole office buildings. We might do an update on a floor every once in a while.
Yeah.
What are those easy wins that I can bring to that team? Yes, quiet space is one thing we've thought about, but what are those other easy wins that I can bring to them and say, you're designing this floor, redoing this floor, here are the things that you need to consider?
Yeah, so first of all, it has those 13 things on that one page, but you'd be amazed at how many spaces I go into and it's like that bright red wall that everybody's staring at all day. Maybe just paint that. Or maybe have an area where people can go and kind of be off to the side and have that opportunity to have that choice. Or just even, quite frankly, have the conversation. Start talking to people and hearing what it is that they need. And we firmly believe that this really all starts with educating individuals. I will tell you, we still get people that are like, yeah, we don't have anybody that's neurodivergent in our organization. We don't need to do this. It's like, really? I find that that's surprising. But I think it's just, those are some of the big parts of it. And those 13 things, absolutely. Thank you. Yes?
Hi, thank you. That was amazing. I'm Sam, clearly from Australia. I had a question just regarding normalizing the work that you do.
Yeah.
In that I've worked in a few workplaces which, are set up sort of like this. I have a neurodivergent son who is home educated because the school system speaks to exactly what you're talking about
Yeah.
in the office system. I'm not sure if there's a question or a statement, but I guess how to normalize that kind of thing in the education system so that when people are going through the workforce, it isn't some bizarre, weird thing that you've got spaces for different types, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is education. And, again, 5 kids. You walk into an elementary school, anybody that has kids in elementary school, and it's literally like the teacher threw up all over the walls, and then she wonders why the kids don't sit still and focus. It's like, are you even kidding me? This is the most grossly overstimulating space I've ever been in my life, and you wonder why these kids aren't sitting still and being quiet. Like, really? And so I think, like, some of it is just pointing out the obvious and just educating people about what it is that they need to do.
Hi, I'm Liza. I'm a graphic designer, art director. So this is very interesting. And like when I think about like the way that I like to work and where I like to work, it does change depending on what I'm doing. But I was wondering what your thoughts are when it comes to like incorporating these principles into digital spaces or like digital design.
2 years ago, the first time I spoke at South by Southwest, it was diversity, equity, and inclusion in the metaverse. And I was on a panel with all these people that were saying, yep, the metaverse and digital stuff is so inclusive. And I said, no, it's not. There's a language barrier. There's an age barrier. There's a gender barrier. There's a cost. And there's no rules that apply. And so people are designing spaces in the metaverse that are so grossly overstimulating. I literally get nauseous watching half of these things. It's like you start flying around and everything. And it's just like, oh my God, right? There are no rules. No rules. And there should be rules. The same kind of rules that apply here apply to graphic design and virtual design as well. We've got to create spaces where people can actually function and there's some clarity.
Hi, Kay. My name is Kate. I'm an audiologist. Your presentation gave me a lot of both relief and inspiration. My question is more on somebody. I travel a lot for work.
Yeah.
I mean, consistently different environment. I have no consistency and I struggle with that. Is that anything that you or your company has looked at for somebody who's maybe a moving target?
Yeah, I will tell you that most people actually right now think that most workplaces are too loud. I actually think it's the opposite. Most places are too quiet because you can clearly hear what somebody is saying. We've taken all the background hum. Then you go to a place that is ridiculously too loud and you can't handle it. And here's one of the negatives of hybrid working. You're working in isolation for 2 days and then you go and you're in shared spaces, and the dichotomy between those is jarring. And you don't get into a rhythm or a pattern. And there were a bunch of psychologists that actually said people didn't want to go back to the office because they thought it was too loud. And they basically said it was like shock therapy. We've been desensitized. The best thing to sensitize yourself is full immersion. Just go straight in.
Have you heard that recent report about auditory processing with the noise reduction headsets? Okay.
Yeah, and loops.
Yeah, like telecoil?
No, like the loop earplugs.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Several people use those, and they absolutely love them.
Okay.
So if you haven't heard that, if you have a problem with background noise, try loops. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kai Roebuck. I'm an industrial design student at the University of Houston.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about how these could be applied to product design. You know, like you've got these big overarching workspaces. Is there a way to, very similar to you, personalize it, make it, like those loops headsets?
Yeah.
Or can those be similarly, like, is there a way to, maybe a treadmill at the desk, or like, do those things work in the same way, or is it really just the space itself needs to be?
No, 100% they work in the same way. In the book, there's a whole thing that talks about the principles and the elements of design: mass, scale, lighting, texture, pattern, all of those things. And all of the things that apply to furniture apply to you. So if you're creating a furniture that's too lightweight, that doesn't feel safe, if I sit on it, I'm afraid I'm going to collapse, or I can't get out of it, or if it's really, really textured and I can't handle that texture, it's going to freak me out. Where other people actually need that, right? So all of these things 100% apply to any design of any space or graphic or interiors or products. So yeah, good question. Thank you.
Great presentation, very informative.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Boughton, and I apologize in advance if this is off topic.
That's okay.
But I was wondering about advisable colors for a digital platform for web design.
Yeah.
WCAG is very specific about everything until neurodiversity.
Yeah. So there are new rules that are going into place in the UK right now about accessibility like on websites, and a lot of it has to do with color. Our graphic person had to redo this presentation multiple times, and she had to get educated about graphics and making them more accessible. And one of our partners came up with a crazy thing that was just like, yeah, no, that whole deck's got to go in the trash. There's absolutely nothing about that supports this. It's overwhelming, right? And so colors absolutely do impact us. So there's a whole thing in the book about how colors impact us, but also it's about size, font, and contrast. And anybody that does everything in caps are very, very difficult to read, right? So uppercase, lowercase, clarity of fonts, size, all of those things really absolutely 100% matter. And in the UK, you can Google it right now. They are coming up with real hard and fast guidelines. We're having to redo our website because of some of those guidelines right now that are coming out.
Thank you. I'll look into that.
Okay, you're welcome.
So I think I'm the perfect person after him because I worked on the WCAG cognitive accessibility new rules that are going to be coming out.
Good.
That's going to be coming out. I'm Betsy Furler. I have an organization called For All Abilities, and we work on cognitive accessibility in the workplace and in universities. And great presentation. Thank you so much.
Me too.
I'm a speech pathologist by training. Yay. We co-train with audiologists.
Yeah.
And it's just so amazing. I know in our research at For All Abilities, we're seeing 50% plus of people in the workplace saying that they have a diagnosis or think they have a diagnosis that would qualify them for ADA accommodations. And yet we're not getting them out. So I'll come up after. I just kind of wanted to say that. Don't really have a question. Know the time is short.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for
No problem.
being here.
Thank you very much. Yes.
I work in the retail industry. So in your research, have you found that there's consistency in these rules or guidelines going from workplaces to retail or even, healthcare hospital, or is the function of the space change the kind of guidelines?
It does. So let me tell you something that I'm most proud of, and then I'll tell you something where we got to improve, and it's your area that we need to improve. Our architectural firm designs stadiums, airports, healthcare, hospitality, justice. We design everything on the planet. And my colleagues in all of those sectors have picked up on all of this work, have incorporated it into their work, and airports now, sports centers, all of those things are being redesigned with these considerations in play. So that's great news, and that's probably one of the things I'm the most proud of. One of the things I think is a huge failing is that about 50% of people in the United States work in an office. In other parts of the world, you go to like parts in Asia, that's less than 10% of the world works in an office. So it's great that we're making offices or public spaces accessible, but a lot of the places like retail, any kind of, service work, any manufacturing, all of those things, we need to address that as well, because there's a large percentage of people that are working in those spaces as well. And they can be very, you're working in manufacturing and there's noises and you're stuck at one place all day and doing a lot of repetitive stuff. It can be a real challenge. Absolutely. So we need to get better and we need to expand it into those areas as well. Yes?
Hi, I'm an occupational therapist. I work with architects. I'm just curious, like in your case, what's the biggest hurdle to convince them like, hey, this is really important? Because that's one of the challenges that I'm seeing. I'm wondering if it's the same with you.
Yeah, nobody knows where to start. And I will tell you that there are times that we do a presentation like this and everybody's just like, it's like they're paralyzed. They don't know where to start. And so that's why we gave the short wins, but also that's why we came up with that audit, because for most people, they've got a lot of space. It's not just about building new space. And so it's how do we make the space that we already have better? And the way that you have to do that, you have to understand what's working and what isn't. You have to go in and you have to do an audit. So those audits that I think, in all honesty, if I had my druthers, and I am old enough to remember when ADA came out, I actually helped write ADA years and years ago. And the very first thing I spent the next 3 years going around the country doing audits of space to say, here's what you need to do to address this. We need to do that because nobody can answer the question, are your spaces neuroinclusive? And if you can't answer that, where do you start, right? So you start by figuring out what could or should we be doing? And it's going back and looking at with a critical eye, understanding these principles. And I will tell you, the other thing I think I'm really proud of is nobody asks us to design space that is ADA compliant anymore. It's just ingrained in how we design space. I tell our clients, you don't have to ask me to design for neuroinclusion for you, because our designers know this. And once you know how to design intelligently, you can't design stupid. And they've all suffered through me being like, what all these, like, if I see rows and rows of workstations or the biggest like rectangular table, I literally, it's like, I'm going to go flying monkey. In fact, I heard somebody in one of our offices say, if Kay saw that plan, she would go flying monkey on you. And I'm like, you better change it now, whatever. So they get it. And like, once you get it, but you have to, it's education. And so we literally talk all the time. People call me all the time and say, oh, we have this organization or whatever where you speak to them. It's like, yes, because the more we spread the word, the better it is. And the most annoying form of flattery is when people copy what you do. So all the other architectural firms now that are doing this, I really am slightly annoyed by it. But in all honesty, it's essential. Because if we were the only one doing it, it wouldn't go anywhere. So we need to bring them in. And that's why we put it all in the book. We literally took all of that IP and put it in the book and said, take it, do it.
Just spreading the word to rate this session. This was amazing. I would like to see you next year back here.
Well, thank you very, very much.